Okay. Hi. I'm Bill Scherer. I think I've seen most of you before, right? I think so. This is part 3 of a 12-part series on stress. And it's the entire title is Mindfulness-Based Stress Management for Healthcare Professionals, with the idea that healthcare professionals tend to be a very stressed out group of people. You might have figured that out already, right? Okay. When you think about first of all, how many people here feel like they are stressed? Oh, wow. Ernie, you're kind of relaxed, right? Okay. Now, if I ask you, like, where do you think most of your stress comes from, what would you say? Well, most people will say other people. Other people. I mean, your relationships are either a source of great satisfaction for you, or they are problematic and create a lot of stress and can actually be damaging to your health. So we're going to talk about, in this 2-part thing on relationships, we're going to talk about how to be really masterful in developing supportive, nurturing, and stress-relieving relationships. There's not a whole lot of success in relationships. I mean, look at marriage, for example, which I look at a lot because I deal with 3 things in my psychological practice. I deal with addictions, I deal with anxiety disorders, and I deal with relationships. There's a lot of overlap between the last 2, anxiety disorders and relationships. There's not a lot of success in relationships. I believe there can be if people know what they're doing, but most people think that love is all you need, and that's not really true. If you look just at marriage, half of all marriages end in divorce, and that, of course, means that the other half are deliriously happy. Right? No. Actually, when you ask them, and I do, would you marry the same person all over again? And I bet maybe half of them say without any hesitation, yeah, sure, in a heartbeat, I would do that. Most people would have some reservations. I ran across a song which I think is really neat, and I don't know who the author is, but I just ran across this song. It's entitled Your Meanings. And this is about romantic relationships, right? You put your meanings in my words, till my words don't mean what they say. I don't mean you hear just what you want to hear. No, you hear what you think I would say, and when some of your meanings hurt you, then you get angry at me. And I put my meanings in your bitter tears, and I hate you for hurting at me. But I only wanted you to know me, to see me and hear me as I feel me inside, laughing easy, crying hard, seldom certain, always wishing we could fly. But you put your meaning in my words, while my meanings stumble and fall. Our lips are still moving, there's sound in the air, but I don't think we're talking at all. Does that kind of sound like some of the relationship issues we all have? A lot of miscommunication, a lot of confusion, and sometimes it's kind of hard to know how to navigate through all that. Well, we're going to talk here in these two sessions about how to develop stress-reducing communication. And you can start by listening. One of the biggest things you can do to reduce your own stress is to become a good listener. Does that make any kind of sense? Yeah. If you're a really good listener, you're going to simplify your relationships, and things are going to go a whole lot smoother. Now, there's some tips here. Like, we start with intention. Intention. When you're communicating with somebody, whether it be a patient, a coworker, or your spouse, anybody, what are you intending? What is it you're wanting? Do you want to be right? Do you want to win? Do you want to save face? Do you want to defend yourself? Do you want to protect you? Or are you really intending to hear that other person and empathize with that other person and build a relationship? And mindfulness is a term we're using a lot in these talks. Mindfulness means just being aware. When you're engaged in communication with somebody else, are you aware of what it is you want? What it is you're intending to happen. Secondly, are you listening in an active and attentive way? There are different ways you can listen. One is called reactive listening. In reactive listening, you're kind of rehearsing your argument, and you're thinking, you're letting the emotions come up, and you're getting upset about what the other person is saying, and you just can't wait for an opening so you can tell them how wrong they are. That's reactive listening. We're talking here about attentive listening, which is a very different animal. In attentive listening, you're really tuning in to the other person, really focused on the other person. You've taken all of your own stuff and you've kind of like put it on the back burner for a while. Your job right now is to be a calm, non-anxious presence for this other person, and to really tune in to them, really get what they're trying to tell you. You may not agree with it, and that's not important, but it is important that you hear them and understand them. And for a lot of people, that alone is a totally different mindset. Okay. Thirdly, feedback. Give them feedback as to what's happening, and feedback is also with your body language. 70% of what you communicate is nonverbal. So if you're saying, sure, tell me all about it, and shuffling papers or answering the phone, you're giving them a lot of feedback about how important that relationship is. Don't one-up the speaker. What's that mean? Have any idea what that means? Well, when somebody's talking, we all do it. You can't help but associate everything they're saying with something from your own life. If they're telling a funny story, you've got funny stories that you want to share, and you can't wait to get in there and tell your own funny story. Well, that's one-upping the speaker. What you need to do is to stay focused on them. You might have a funny story or something in your experience that relates to what they're saying. Hold on to it. Your job right now is to really tune into them and get what they're trying to tell you, not shift the conversation in another direction. Hold off on giving advice. For the most part, when people have something that they're trying to tell you and they're concerned about something or bothered by something, they're not usually looking for advice. They're looking for someone to hear them, someone to validate their experience, someone to understand where they're coming from. This is kind of a male thing. And then I noticed that apart from Ernie, everybody else in here is female, right? So, yeah, it's kind of a male thing, right? Men are often in the fix-it mode. They hear a problem, here's a solution. And that tends to make a lot of women angry, because they're not looking for somebody to give them a quick fix. They're looking for somebody to really hear them, validate their experience, really understand their feelings, and they want to feel understood and listened to. And all of these things, you need to practice. If you have an important conversation coming up, you might practice it in advance. Really think through what it is you want to get out of that communication, what you want the other person to get out of that communication. And then you do get a chance to talk. It's not all listening. You do get a chance to talk. If you're having a conflict situation, it's really important to think in terms of damage control and repair. In marriage particularly, it's really important that people make repair attempts, fix-it attempts. They try to kind of get it back to a good place again. And that's not the time when your partner tries to repair it. That's not the time to close in for the kill. That's the time to kind of match that. If one person makes a conciliatory gesture, the other person needs to recognize that and make their own conciliatory gesture. One person can change the interaction, and that person can be you. Eye language. When you start talking at somebody and using the word you a lot, you almost have to point your finger, right? You. And the other person is probably going to get defensive. Okay? It's a whole lot better if you can use I language and say, I'm feeling some confusion, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling scared. That often tends to open things up. Talk for you using I language. And something I stress a lot is something called the anger formula. Anger formula is really, and you don't have to be angry to use it, it's just good communication. For example, if you ladies, if your spouse comes home late and you've cooked dinner and your spouse is way late and didn't bother to call you, how do you respond to that? Anybody?
He didn't call.
That's probably a typical response, right? Okay. The anger formula has like 4 parts, and this is really useful. And the 4 parts are like the situation, what's happening, what you feel, what you want, and kind of checking that out with the other person. So in that example I just gave, you might say to your partner in a calm voice, because that's important, when you come home late without giving me a call, I feel really worried and angry. If you know you're going to be late, I'd really like you to call me and let me know. I'd really appreciate it if you do that. Will you do that for me? It's also something we call whole communication. You could talk all day and you can't really add to that message. You've said it all. But you're not saying it in an attacking way. You're very clearly telling the other person what you feel and what you want, and you're checking it out with them. Now, if you're on the receiving end of that kind of communication, you're probably more likely to respond in a positive way. Does that make sense? Whereas, on the other hand, if you jump up and down and say, you're always late and you're so inconsiderate and you're just being a real jerk, probably you're not going to get a positive response. Okay? So again, the anger formula, 4 parts: situation, the I feel statement, I would like, I want, and checking it out. When you come home late without giving me a call, I feel worried and angry. I'd really like you to call me if you know you're going to be late. Will you do that for me? Okay. No kitchen sinking. What are we doing when we're kitchen sinking? You ever hear the phrase, everything including the kitchen sink? Well, that's when you get on your partner and or a coworker or somebody else and you're saying, here's a list of the things that you're doing to irritate me. In fact, I got some things from 1978 that I'm still upset about, and you just unload on them. Now, what's the probability that your partner is going to be open and non-defensive and willing to hear all that? Probably not very much. Okay, so try to keep it to one issue. I have never met a couple yet, and I've been working with couples for a lot of years. I've never met a couple yet that can deal with more than one issue at a time. The moment you start bringing in multiple issues, it starts to go downhill. Watch the labels. You never pick up after yourself. You're just such a slob. Well, again, you're going to create a lot of defensiveness. Watch the absolutes. Like, you never pick up after yourself, or you're always inconsiderate. Absolutes are rarely accurate, and again, they're going to create a lot of defensiveness. Timing is everything. I mean, try to gauge it so that you're approaching the person not when they're most stressed out, but when they're most likely to hear you. And pay attention to the patterns in your relationship. And that's what I do as a marriage therapist, is I pay attention to patterns. One very typical pattern that I see all the time, I call it the magpie mole syndrome. You ever hear of that before? The magpie mole syndrome. This is interesting. This is where one person, usually the guy, sorry Ernie, usually the guy doesn't like conflict and doesn't like all this emotional stuff. He'd like to avoid it. Doesn't want to deal with this stuff. He can go off to war and shoot people, but he doesn't know how to deal with his spouse when she's upset. He'd rather just avoid it. So he becomes a mole. Well, when he shuts down and avoids or won't deal with it, what happens to her? She becomes the magpie. Right? Hence the magpie mole syndrome. You can do this with people in a laboratory. You can take men and women into a laboratory and wire them up and put them in a stressful situation, a conflict situation. His arousal is much sharper, steeper, higher. He gets uncomfortable much easier. That's the way he is neurologically. Okay? She takes the emotional heat a whole lot better than he does. You kind of knew that, right? Okay. It takes him longer to calm down. Men find it more aversive, this conflict with somebody that they really care about. It's more stressful for them. And so there's a tendency for a lot of men to want to avoid it. And when they avoid it, she gets upset. She gets more upset. She will get to be very attacking just to get a response out of him. And now he's really wanting to leave town. That sounds kind of funny, but in the extreme, it can be pretty deadly in a relationship. So that's one pattern. And my job as a marriage counselor is I look for patterns. I look for recurring things that happen again and again and again. And I try to get people to talk about those patterns and talk about them at a very deep level. Like, what's really going on here? What are your fears? Human beings have like two basic fears about relationships. You know what they are? And we all have both fears. We fear being controlled, swallowed up, losing our identity. Okay? Being dominated by the other person. And we fear being abandoned. Okay? And we all have both, and we flip-flop back and forth. One person might be fearing control and kind of pulling away and backing up, and that triggers the other person's fear of being abandoned. And they try harder, which heightens this person's fear of being controlled, and so on. Now, again, I try to get people just to talk about what's really going on, to talk without blaming or defending, and just to really understand what's happening with their partner. Assertiveness is really important, and we're going to devote a lot more time to assertiveness in the next session. Assertiveness, what is that? There are basically three ways that you can deal with people. You can be passive, non-assertive, where you don't really stand up for yourself. You can be aggressive, where you don't really care much about the rights and feelings of the other person, and that doesn't work out very well. Or you can be assertive. And when you're assertive, you believe that you have a perfect right to tell people what you think, what you feel, what you want, what you don't want, and you're not going to feel scared or guilty about doing that. Assertiveness tends to be more of a problem for women than for men. A lot of women, and I hate to stereotype people, but I think there's a lot of truth in this. A lot of women are raised to be nice and to not rock the boat, not put yourself first, not be selfish, take care of other people, fix relationships, and so a lot of women hold back on being assertive in certain situations, and that's often a factor in low self-esteem and anxiety and depression and stress. If you're not assertive, you're going to have a lot more stress in your life. If you stuff your feelings, you're going to have a lot of anxiety and depression, and you're not going to feel very good about yourself. What assertive behavior is not? Well, it's not getting your way. It's not dominating other people. It's not being right. Assertiveness is respectful. It's caring. It's respectful, but at the same time, it's balanced out with believing that you have a perfect right to take care of you. It's balancing taking care of you with taking care of the other person. If you're always taking care of the other person, that gets to be a problem. Actually, we call that codependency. If other people's needs and feelings are more important than yours. Okay. Now, I want to talk about something we call intentional relating. And this is something I developed back years ago. I was going to have copies of this for you, but we didn't get them copied in time. You can go to my website, which is www.alternativegroupinc.com, and you can find what I'm going to show you. You can find all the materials I'm going to show you. This is a scheme we came up with years ago, Robin and I, to talk about how people deal with conflict. Now, I know you can't see that from the back row. I'm going to break it down for you. I'm going to show you sections of this, and again, it's on the website where you can download it, and we will have additional copies of it here at the next talk. We're going to talk about this in segments, and we're going to talk about the choice people have between the left pathway and the right pathway. Left pathway is where most people are. The right pathway is where relationship building takes place. So, looking at that very top portion, now we're blowing it up a little bit. There's always going to be conflict. You can't be around other people without conflict. Is that a true statement? What do you think? Why? Because you're different people. You have different needs and feelings and thoughts and interests and experiences and memories and goals. There's going to be conflict. And conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Show me a relationship without conflict and I'll show you probably a pretty boring relationship. We'll talk more about that. You need conflict. This is a tough sell. I have to convince people that conflict is an opportunity. Okay? So because we're different, conflict is inevitable. And I love this quote here from Rollo May. Rollo May said, "Real freedom, not the kind we think we have, but real freedom." See, we think we're free to choose, but often you're just kind of like carrying out your program. You're carrying out your script. You're kind of doing things the way you've always done them and been reinforced or punished for them in the past. So you think you're free, but you're kind of like you're kind of conditioned to a certain extent to behave in a predetermined way. Okay? But Rollo May said real freedom is the ability to pause between stimulus and response. Might be a split second. To pause. And in that pause, to make a choice. And that's what we call mindfulness. I keep talking about mindfulness. Mindfulness is just being so aware of what's happening right now that I can slow things down and I can choose to go in a direction that's emotionally intelligent. I can choose to go in a direction that's building relationships rather than damaging relationships. Okay? And choice is the key, whether I go left or right. Now let's look at that left-hand pathway. And again, this is on the website, and I apologize for not having copies. We had a little miscommunication. We didn't get copies today, but you can go on the website, and I will bring copies next time of this whole thing. The left-hand pathway, I've labeled this the path of fear, protection, and competition. And most people are over here. Most people, if you say conflict, they immediately think, what? Like if I say conflict, say the first word that comes into your mind. Conflict. Pardon? Fight. Fight. Pain. Arguing. Arguing. Anger. Fight. Okay. What else? Well, you notice most of the words that people are throwing out are negative. Because for most people, conflict is a negative. Okay? And I've labeled this, again, the path of fear, protection, and competition. The core belief is that conflict is negative and dangerous, and this kind of grows out of our past experience. We tend not to like conflict very much. And we tend to want to avoid it, or get beyond it, or just not deal with it. The intention over on the left-hand side is to be right, to protect yourself, to save face, to defend, to avoid losing. Most people, when a conflict comes up, they're kind of in protection mode. Now, there are individual choices and behaviors. Individuals can get into fighting back. And there are various ways you can do this. You can fight back by insisting, blaming, criticizing, accusing, shouting, forcing, competing. These are all ways of fighting, right? You can get into submitting. We just give in, give up, settle. Even though you don't really want to settle, you just don't want the fight. You comply, you yield, you follow, you collapse. Or you could flee. Another individual choice. How do you flee? You withdraw. You don't deal with it. You leave. You shut up. You hide. You quit. You escape. You get sick. Some people get sick so they don't have to deal with stuff. You could freeze. Well, we'll just wait on this. We'll sleep on it. We'll delay. Don't act. Don't do anything. Be silent. Stonewall it. Avoid. Sulk. Deny. Within an organization, we get some other kinds of choices, like number one is a reliance on higher authority. At least 25% of a manager's time is spent dealing with conflict. Okay, in healthcare and education, it's often more than 50%. Why healthcare and education? I'm not sure, but managers are spending a lot of time dealing with conflict. And so one way of dealing with conflict is just pass it on, let the boss decide, bring it to the boss. Power plays, trying to force a decision, or just avoiding, pretending that the problem doesn't exist. A lot of organizations will just wait and see and think and hope that that conflict between coworkers will go away, and often it doesn't, and often it comes out in overuse of sick time, or a lawsuit, or people quitting unexpectedly, all kinds of problems. Now, if you're on this left-hand side, you're going to have negative interactions, like might be fighting with somebody who's also in fight mode. So you're going to fight. And you're going to have a lot of inner turmoil and distrust and alienation. You might have fight-freeze. You're fighting, the other person is freezing. You might have fight-submit, freeze-freeze, flee-flee. Flee-flee is interesting because you get disengaged couples where they just don't deal with each other at all. Sometimes they don't even come home. You have an empty house, nobody comes home to it. Okay? Long-term consequences, very serious. For individuals, a lot of depression. A lot of the depression and anxiety that we see has to do with the way people are dealing with relationships and conflict. A lot of depression, anxiety, low trust, feeling unsafe, feeling alienated, lowered self-esteem. Most of the stress people have has to do with the fact that their relationships aren't going very well. Okay? For couples and families, we're talking about the erosion of relationships and finally the breakdown of those relationships. Tremendous cost to the individuals and to the children that might be involved. For organizations, we're talking about increased cost, employee turnover, lowered morale, lowered cohesiveness. Probably most of workplace stress has to do with relationships. Does that make sense? Okay. Now the right pathway is very different. Remember I said most people are on the left-hand pathway. The right-hand pathway is very, very different, and my job is to convince people that they need to work on being on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, the core belief is that conflict is an opportunity. That's a tough sell. Somebody hates conflict. I'm trying to teach them that conflict is a good thing. It's an opportunity to grow your relationship. Being able to make a shift toward being non-defensive and open and willing to learn and becoming very masterful in the way you deal with conflict. Self-talk over on this side. Self-talk, we all talk to ourselves all the time. We talked about that in the last session, okay? The self-talk over on this side is self-calming. It's like, all right, slow it down. Shh, I don't have to rewrite. I can listen. And it's relationship enhancing. Where the self-talk on the other side was all, geared toward fight or flight. The intention over here on the right-hand pathway is to find a solution that works for both of us. Find something where we're both getting our needs met. Might take more time. Individual choices. First one is manage your own pressure. How do you do that? And again, here's where we get into mindfulness once again, right? Breathe. Breathe abdominally. We talked about that. Breathe abdominally, not from your upper chest. When you're uptight, when you're breathing from up here, And think about it, when you're in a conflict situation and you're upset, you're usually breathing from up here and carrying a lot of tension in your upper chest and neck and shoulders. You know, you're ready to do battle. You're in fight or flight mode. And you're operating out of your sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. And what you need to get very good at is being able to shift and start to breathe from your diaphragm and in your head at the same time to say, slow it down, let it go, it's okay. You can get really good at this, by the way. You can have somebody screaming in your face and you can actually relax and behave, make positive choices, believe it or not. Cops have to learn how to do this. You know, cops that get a lot of abuse, they can't just shoot the guy, you know, they got to stay calm, right? Well, they're not supposed to shoot the guy, right? Okay. So, the self-talk needs to be self-calming and relationship-enhancing, and at the same time, physically, you breathe and slow things down. We're going to talk more about that. This is how you become mindful, by the way, is just being able to get really good at slowing things down, being very aware of what's happening in the moment, and being able to choose emotionally intelligent responses. You can't do that when you're in fight or flight mode. And I really work hard with couples on this, that, okay, don't try to do anything when you're in fight or flight mode. If you need to walk around the block, take a break. Tell your partner you're coming back, otherwise they'll feel abandoned and they'll get upset. You know, but don't try to fix it when you're in fight or flight mode. You just make a mess of it. You first have to get yourself settled down and your head settled down. And then you have all kinds of choices besides fight or flight, which are not good choices. Okay? Now you can practice active listening, attending, acknowledging, validating, inviting, encouraging, exploring. We'll talk more about these in detail with the next session. You can open up. You can be assertive and respectful. Assertive really is respectful. You can adopt a we attitude. We have a problem. What can we do about our problem? No blaming. What can we do so we're both getting what we need? Organizations need to have a built-in program of conflict resolution where everybody learns how to deal with conflict at the lowest possible level. And that's the optimal pathway. Keep it simple and keep people face-to-face dealing with their own situation, and give them the skills training they need. Now, if people are operating on the right-hand pathway, conflict situations are detoxified. Relationships are made better and they're strengthened. Partnering is made better. Collaborative team efforts rather than avoidance and competition and coercion. And the cost of conflict really goes down. For individuals, if you're on the right-hand pathway, you're definitely dealing with your stress a whole lot better. If you're on the right-hand pathway, you have this sense of well-being and connection and joyfulness and higher self-esteem. If your relationships are going well, you're doing well. And you're handling your stress much better. Okay? For couples and families, we're talking about relationships that are alive and deeply satisfying. And they're really modeling for their kids how adults have healthy communication skills. If you want to do something really great for your kids, show them how two adults can disagree, but stay connected, stay calm, keep talking, and work it through without losing the love. Show them how that's done, and you will have given your kids something truly amazing and something that will be one of their very best human skills for the rest of their lives. For organizations, definitely they're going to be more profitable and productive and have higher morale and creativity and growth and cohesiveness. Okay? So, my job again is to help people be on the right-hand pathway where most people are on the left-hand pathway. And back to my chart again, you start up here with the idea that conflict is inevitable. You're going to have conflict. And you have a choice. Do you go left where you're defensive and closed and uptight? Or do you go right, where you're calm and open and willing to learn and non-defensive and mindful? Most people are over on the left-hand side. Most people don't deal with conflict very well. Relationship building virtually always takes place on the right-hand side. And this is learnable and teachable. People can learn this and they can become really masterful at how to deal with conflict in their lives. And that's how you build relationships. Show me a relationship that doesn't have any conflict. And again, I'll show you a relationship that, unless it's very new, where people are making nice. If it's an old relationship and there's no conflict, I would be suspicious of that. Once in a while I have a couple come in and they've been together for 25 years or so, and the last kid is leaving the home, and I'll say, well, why are you here? Well, we're just not having any fun. Well, do you fight? No, we never fight. But the relationship is really empty. It's like it's never grown. Your relationship's not going to really grow unless you can really put stuff out there and deal with each other and learn about each other and resolve things and take it to a new level. If you just make nice and avoid conflict, it's probably going to become rather boring. Okay, so here's Shearer's 5 intentional relating skills, and we'll go deeper into this next time we get together. I'm going to wrap it up here in about 5 minutes. Number 1, adopt and maintain an intentional attitude. I intend to help this relationship work. Okay? The goal shouldn't be to be right or to punish or to fix it or to avoid. No, the goal is to build a great relationship. That needs to be the intention that you never lose track of. Okay? And one person can change the interaction. That one person can be you. You can become really, really masterful at relating. My second intentional relating skill is tune into your body and mind. Just work on awareness of, okay, what's going on in my head? What am I telling myself? Center yourself. Move your center from up here to down here. Make this shift. Open up. Let go of the tension, calm your self-talk, breathe, and then think about all the choices you have before you that can be positive choices for the relationship. And again, we'll go into this in more detail with the next session. Number 3, open up and put your cards on the table assertively, not aggressively. Eye language, tell it like it is, but be respectful. Stay calm, stay connected. Describe your feelings, don't attack with them. There's a huge difference there. Describe them. I feel angry, I feel confused, I feel scared right now. That tends to open things up. When you start putting you and always in there, it tends to be more of an attack. Tune into your partner. Really, really tune into your partner. Listen like you never listened before. Calmly, non-reactively, respectfully. Listen to understand. You don't have to agree, but you do need to understand. Understanding is vital. And make it a priority to learn and practice these intentional relating skills continually. It's a lifelong journey. And you can get better and better. It's like emotional intelligence is being intelligent about your emotions. And that's something you can forever be raising. Okay? Your IQ is fixed. Whatever, you're all bright people, I'm sure, but your IQ is going to stay where it's at. Your emotional intelligence, on the other hand, can get better and better and better if you're open to it, if you're willing. Like I said, you can get very, very good at, very masterful at being in relationship and dealing with conflict. Here's a quote from, well, you got Dr. Phil and Dr. Laurel, so this is Dr. Bill. Here's a quote from Dr. Bill. Work very hard to change other people, and you're going to succeed only in getting back a lot of resistance and resentment. Okay, the more you try to fix them, the more they're going to resist. It's not going to work out very well. But if you really, really work very, very hard at just being self-aware and managing yourself and get good at that, that gives you tremendous influence over how all your relationships are going to go. You can become really masterful at this, and you can become really masterful at being in relationships and having great relationships that don't produce a lot of stress. It's kind of like the golden rule, okay? Or as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, this is simple. It's just not easy. Any questions?